Good morning to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our update on Category 5 Hurricane Beryl. Yes, Hurricane Beryl did strengthen overnight into a Category 5 storm. It continues to shatter basically every single record that we would put in its place would fall under Beryl. It is now the earliest Category 5 hurricane on record in the Atlantic, the strongest hurricane on record in the month of July, and Beryl just continues to impress. Um, Even when we think that it will not impress anymore and it would weaken, somehow Beryl continues to push through. So we have a lot to go over today in our update today. So let's get started. I want to start off with a quite incredible shot of the visible satellite. This is really, once again, a storm that you do not see for this time of year. Keep in mind, it is still only July 2nd. You really don't see a storm like this in the Eastern Caribbean of all places. Remember when earlier we talked about last week that if what would end up becoming Beryl did not intensify enough by the time it got to the Caribbean, it would probably struggle because of how generally unfavorable the Eastern Caribbean is. Well, this storm literally just became a Category 5 in the Eastern Caribbean overnight. It is quite literally incredible, and it just goes to show how things change sometimes in just a matter of a few days. I don't think anybody up until yesterday probably thought that Beryl would be anywhere close to Category 5 intensity. But here it is today. It is still a Category 5 right now, actually. And everybody that is from Haiti, Dominican Republic, westward into the Caribbean, especially Jamaica at this moment, needs to prepare for potentially what will be a very dangerous hurricane headed their way. The islands were slammed when Beryl moved through there yesterday morning, especially the Carriacou Island in Grenada was just absolutely decimated. It was their worst storm basically ever. This was, people are saying that it's even worse than Ivan of 2004 for Grenada right now. And unfortunately, as Beryl continues to track through the Caribbean, it would not shock me if we see some of the scenes in Grenada replicated in places, especially like Jamaica, over the next several days as Beryl continues to march through the Caribbean over the next several days. Let's get the latest update by the National Hurricane Center right now. As of the 8 a.m. advisory, it is still a Category 5 storm, winds of 165 miles per hour with a pressure of 934 millibars. Beryl is the strongest hurricane on record in the month of July in terms of wind speed. Obviously, if you're a hurricane history nerd like I am, you know that the previous record was set by Hurricane Emily, which was only 160 miles per hour, so barely Category 5 was Hurricane Emily in the year of 2005, and we all know how that year went. And the fact that we're breaking a record like that from the year 2005, it is just it is just undescribable, and it is just defining once again all records that we thought would not be broken for a while. Hurricane Beryl is breaking those records. It is moving west-northwest at 22 miles per hour. It is located at 15 north and 67.9 west, so it is continuing to gain latitude. And this should really be something that Jamaica watches out for because there is a hurricane warning in effect for Jamaica. But it does seem like Hurricane Beryl, though, has now leveled out and weakened, or is going to begin to weaken. Let me actually show you the long waves IR satellite. Just really impressive, especially those earlier frames. You could really see how cold the CDO was and how expansive it was around the eye. Let me just stop it really quickly on the earlier images. This was how it looked earlier. Just an incredible storm, especially for the fact that this was still only July and we still had a storm that looked like this. And people potentially say as well that recon supported even stronger than 165 miles per hour with Beryl. I mean, with the look on satellite like this, it wouldn't even shock me if that was the case, but it is beginning to weaken now, especially over the last several frames. You could see the CDO definitely not as defined as before. Appears to be some dry air has entrained into Beryl. And we actually could take a look at the National Hurricane Center cone over the next several days. I do believe it is weakening on out here for Beryl. It's probably not going to strengthen anymore. I believe once it gets past the Western Caribbean, I think it might have another chance, but we'll have to see. But nonetheless, it is still probably going to remain a hurricane all throughout the entirety of the Caribbean now. Even a major hurricane is looking possible for Jamaica at this point. I think yesterday, given the trends, we were expecting that there would only be a hurricane level intensity for Jamaica. Today, it is now looking possible that they might indeed get a major hurricane, if not very close to it, and that is what the National Hurricane Center expects now. Basically, passing right near Jamaica tomorrow afternoon, and there is a hurricane warning in effect for that place as well. And there's also other warnings in effect too. Obviously, let's go over them. Hurricane warning in effect for Jamaica. There's a hurricane watch in effect for Grand Cayman, Little Cayman, and Cayman Brac Islands. And there's also a tropical storm warning in effect now for the south coast of the Dominican Republic, and the south coast of Haiti too. So if you're generally within that area, keep an eye out on Beryl, and it is definitely just going to continue to cause impacts, no matter what. I mean, this is already such a very impactful storm. It is a Category 5 after all. It is going to weaken from that, but it's still going to bring lots of impacts through the Caribbean. And then obviously interests in Cuba. Cuba should still monitor the progress of Beryl. I think there will probably be some warnings and watches issued sometime later on, maybe for the southernmost parts of Cuba. But I think especially after that now, it's really a matter of, if you're in the Yucatan, you really got to watch the progress next for Beryl. It'll probably be significantly weaker, although I'm not sure how much, but it'll definitely be weaker than what it is now. This Category 5 for sure is not going to last all the way into the Yucatan Peninsula, into the far western Caribbean, but it's still probably going to be a hurricane in the very least by then. And then after that, we get towards day 4 and 5. This enters the Gulf of Mexico, and then obviously the uncertainty increases a lot. But all I will say is that those in Texas and Louisiana, especially in the Gulf Coast, the whole entire Gulf Coast should watch, but I think especially the central western Gulf Coast should begin to monitor the progress of Beryl very closely, and we'll go over why in just a moment. So we went over the warnings. So why did Beryl become as strong as it did? Obviously it is probably, there's just some things that just happen, and it's just a matter of luck, and I definitely do believe that luck was absolutely on Beryl's side. But I mean, there's also a meteorological aspect to why Beryl really intensified as much as it did as well. Just take a look at the sea surface temperature anomalies, and let me see if this really quickly updated. Yes, it did. So we have the latest now for the sea surface temperature anomalies, but it still remains generally the same. Look at how much above normal the Caribbean is, and even the Western MDR as well. But we've been talking about this since the spring and since the winter, that the MDR was incredibly warm. Not just the MDR, actually, the entire deep tropics were incredibly warm compared to what they should be, record breaking in a lot of cases, and it still remains to be that way into the Caribbean right now. Areas at least a degree or even 2 degrees Celsius above normal. So because this is the anomalies, these are not the actual sea surface temperatures, but these are the anomalies, and the departures from normal is what anomaly means. And these oranges and reds represent 1 to 2 degrees Celsius above normal, basically throughout the entire Caribbean, especially in the Eastern Caribbean though, and even in the Western MDR too, which is what helped Beryl really intensify quite rapidly, to say the least, but also maintain a really strong intensity too for, I think, the past 2 or 3 days now, as it traversed from the MDR into the Caribbean. And just to see how it looks like through the rest of the Caribbean, all you could see is that these anomalies, they persist all throughout the Caribbean. The Caribbean is very ample for major hurricane development and sustainment right now. The Caribbean is the warmest part of the Atlantic anyways, and the fact that even that, it is well above normal there, It is just incredible. It does drop off a little bit as we get towards the northwestern Caribbean, but trust me, it is still very much more than enough for to be able to sustain a major hurricane there. And that is definitely one part of why Beryl intensified the way it did. I had a tweet from somebody. Let me see if I can find it. I think it's Brian McNulty. He posted this. Yes. Actually, no, never mind. I'm not going to bring it up. Anyways, I think it was actually Philip Klotzbach. But the other part was, I was going to mention, by the way, the ocean heat content too through the Caribbean was record breaking. We were far ahead in the ocean heat content values in the Caribbean, which is just incredible. And obviously, it definitely fueled Beryl to become as strong as it is. But the upper level wind pattern too, quite literally the most favorable upper level wind pattern you could get for a very strong tropical system is what we got for Beryl as well. These are the upper level winds in the Atlantic, and notice where Beryl is right now. All of these wind bars kind of fanning out from the center of Beryl. That represents outflow, an outflow channel situated directly over Beryl, meaning that the storm is able to breathe, it is able to breathe out, and all the air is able to move away from the storm, all of the air that is rising from the ocean. And it's just part of the natural process with convection. It rises at the surface, moves up, and then it spreads outward over the top of the atmosphere, and the air moves away. And when we have outflow, well situated outflow with the storm, it is really favorable for intensification, and that is exactly what Beryl has right now, and it continues to have. Although you do see that the wind direction does begin to shift as this moves into the central and western Caribbean, as we talked about before. Wind shear will increase from now on out till Beryl moves into the western Caribbean, and then I guess upper level winds become slightly more favorable once again there. Although I don't think really the models show that much strengthening anymore once after the central Caribbean. I know they showed that at some point. But the bottom line is that the upper level winds too, extraordinarily favorable for Beryl. Even for this year, which is expected to be a La Nina, so that's already helpful because La Nina generally reduces upper level winds across the basin as a whole. That's just the general nature of a developing La Nina slash neutral year in the Atlantic. But Beryl, I think, was also just really able to get lucky with its upper level wind pattern, which obviously helped it take full advantage of all of the very warm sea surface temperatures that it had in its path. And as a result, we got what we got, and we got record-breaking Category 5 Hurricane Beryl. So, with that being said, what does the future look like for Beryl? Let's take a look at the GFS run and try to determine what that is, because there's lots of uncertainty, and I'll show you that in just a moment with the other models, but let's start with the GFS. So we take it out in time, hour 36, so this is Wednesday afternoon. It approaches Jamaica. The GFS seems to move this right over Jamaica and then into the Western Caribbean it goes. Looks like a Yucatan impact, although I'll show you what the intensity is for the GFS, and this is part of the reason why I'm very skeptical of a lot of things. Look at that. At the Yucatan, by day 3, hour 72, the GFS has a 999 millibar storm. Compared to a 934 millibar storm now, I'm not really sure that that will be the case, because look at what the GFS initializes Beryl as of the 60 run for about this time roughly in the Eastern Caribbean. The GFS has a 973 millibar storm, and if we go back to what the National Hurricane Center has as of the 11 a.m. Oh, the 11 a.m. is out. I see. They actually weakened it to 160 miles per hour, so it's weakening a little bit. It is still a Category 5 hurricane, though, and the pressure is 938 millibars. So, roughly at least 30 millibars off in the pressure. So that will definitely make a huge difference, especially when it comes to how the upper levels will influence Beryl. But that's just a caveat to keep in mind. So what I'm trying to say is I definitely don't think that Beryl will be as weak as the GFS shows in reality as it gets through the Caribbean, partially because it's probably going to be stronger, and it's already stronger than what the GFS actually has it at current time. So I would just completely disregard the GFS with intensity. But in terms of track, on the other hand, it does get a little interesting because the GFS, after brings us into the Yucatan, it ends up in the Bay of Campeche. But notice, let's shift this now to the 500 millibar pattern. Just really quickly, what's keeping Beryl in the Caribbean right now, and not turning into Florida, for instance, automatically? I'm not saying that it's going to do that, because it won't. Because we have a huge high pressure right now situated right over the top of Beryl in the northern Gulf, and this is directing it directly west into the Caribbean. It's not giving it a chance to move north, because a high pressure, just think of it as a wall, and you're not going to crash into the wall and try to move forward into the wall. You can't. It's a solid wall, and that's exactly what a high pressure system is. So it has to move around the wall, and with that, it moves further west into the Caribbean. But this is roughly hour 90 now, and this is when Beryl ends up in the Bay of Campeche. Notice what happens is, over time, notice this high pressure, it starts to shift to the east, and you see a bunch of these blues, which represent lower than normal heights, so generally lower upper level air patterns, just north of Texas, and that is a weakness that begins to open up for Beryl as it's in the Gulf. And let's really quickly bring you back to the 850 millibar vorticity. I guess the GFS in the 60 run picks up on that weakness, and notice what it does with Beryl. I definitely don't think it's just going to be as weak as the GFS shows. I just want to put it as a disclaimer right now. But whatever is left with Beryl, the GFS does end up sweeping it into southern Texas. So that means we really got to watch the high pressure system that is over a Beryl right now, and watch over the next several days, does it slide east enough and weaken, and then we get any sort of weakness that comes down from Texas, and does that scoop this storm up and bring it up into the Gulf Coast, or will the high pressure system remain strong enough that Beryl could continue on into Mexico, and it'll not be a Gulf Coast threat? And that is a solution that the European definitely shows more, and I find the European a little bit more interesting, because it actually keeps this probably a pretty decent hurricane into the Western Caribbean, which I think is a lot more likely than what it shows now. But let's just look at the 0Z run, since that's the run that goes out to the next 5 days. And the European seems to think, obviously, that there will be a much stronger high pressure system over Florida. Clearly not enough of a weakness, and because of that, it just brings it into Mexico. While as the GFS, on the other hand, Beryl is already gone by that time and inland. It just scoops it up completely into the Gulf Coast, into Texas specifically, while the European still has it not even inland yet. So that's also a difference too. The GFS seems to be a lot quicker with Beryl, and the European is a lot slower. See, there's a lot of differences that need to be ironed out right now when it comes to Beryl, and it's really going to depend on how Beryl continues over the next several hours. But regardless, you can see there's a lot of uncertainty, especially when it comes to what Beryl will do in the Gulf. And that's why I say, if you're in the Gulf Coast, the entire Gulf Coast, although I'd say especially Louisiana and Texas and northern Mexico too, including the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, I'd watch Beryl really closely. I'd monitor the progress of this storm, and especially if you're in Jamaica, start preparing now and rush your preparations to completion with Beryl by tonight, and latest early tomorrow, because it looks like Jamaica is next in line with the impacts with Beryl. And then after that, it is just a wait and see game. There's a lot of uncertainty that needs to be ironed, but we're definitely going to be monitoring the progress very closely of Beryl over the next several days. And we'll see what happens. The storm has thrown a lot of surprises, and I definitely won't be shocked if Beryl has one more trick up her sleeve before it is all said and done. over the next several days. With that being said, I'm going to end off this update for today. If you liked what you saw today, really would appreciate if you like, comment, subscribe. Although I'm not going to say today because I'm probably going to upload once more again this afternoon. So if you're not subscribed yet and you want to stay tuned for that, subscribe now so you can get it as soon as I upload it. With that being said, stay safe. Especially to those in the Caribbean islands that are watching this morning. And you guys are, I know, probably struggling and dealing with a lot right now, especially after Beryl. My heart goes out to all of you and your families. And my heart is also with those in Jamaica that is likely to get Beryl over the next day or so as it passes through the Caribbean. Because I know for sure it is definitely not going to be an easy thing recovering. And it's probably going to take a long time, especially to recover after a storm like Beryl, especially for those in the Windward Islands. So I hope all of you guys stay safe, and I hope everybody stays safe too. Much peace, love, and kindness to you all, and we will talk again very soon.